The Elamites were one of the oldest and most fascinating peoples of the Middle East, with a history dating back more than 5,000 years. Their civilization developed in the area that today corresponds to southwestern Iran, near Mesopotamia. Elam, as the kingdom of these peoples was called, left a significant mark on human history, being one of the first great civilizations of the ancient world. The history of the Elamites begins around 3000 BC, during the period known as Proto-Elamite. During this phase, the Elamites already had an advanced culture, with cities and their own social organization. One of the main centers of this civilization was the city of Susa, founded around 4000 BC in the Karun River basin. Susa was, without a doubt, the cultural and political heart of Elam, and there the Elamites began to stand out in both the arts and architecture. The earliest known records of the Proto-Elamite script, a writing system still not fully deciphered, appear around 3100 BC. At that time, Elam was a land made up of small states that eventually came together to form an empire. These states were located in different regions of Elam and reflected the various natural areas that made up this vast civilization. Each region had its own resources, such as minerals and fertile lands, which were exchanged among the various states to ensure prosperity for all. During the period known as Old Elamite, which lasted from about 2700 to 1500 BC, Elam grew in power and influence. In this period, the first Elamite dynasties began to form, and the state of Elam was gradually consolidated. Although the Elamites had a strong identity of their own, they often found themselves in conflict with their neighbors, especially with the cities of Sumer in Mesopotamia. The Elamites were not only known for their skill in battle, but also for their cultural achievements. Elamite cities were famous for their monumental architecture and works of art, which included sculptures, ceramics, and fine jewelry. After the Old Elamite period, Elam went through moments of great political and social transition, with several dynasties that marked the continuity and resilience of this civilization. The Awan dynasty, which ruled Elam from approximately 2300 to 2150 BC, was marked by a series of significant events. During the reign of King Awan Lu-Ishan, Elam came into conflict with the Akkadian Empire, led by Sargon of Akkad, who defeated Lu-Ishan and subjugated the city of Susa. Sargon also attempted to impose Akkadian, an East Semitic language, as the official language of Elam. This attempt at cultural assimilation by the Mesopotamians didn't last long. With the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, Elam regained its independence under the rule of Kutik-Inshushinak, the last king of the Awan dynasty. During his reign, he restored control over Susa and Anshan, promoted a brief period of political unity, and abandoned the Akkadian language in favor of linear Elamite writing, which represented a significant cultural advancement for Elam. However, after the death of Kutik-Inshushinak, Elam faced a temporary invasion by the Gutians, a people who lived in northwestern Iran, which further weakened the kingdom. About a century after the fall of the Awan dynasty, Elam was ruled by the Shimashki dynasty. During this period, Elam experienced a series of alternating periods of conflict and peace. The Sumerian king Shulgi of the Neo-Sumerian Empire attempted to invade the Susa region, and the Elamites faced attacks from various Mesopotamian peoples and the Gutians. Despite the hardships, the Shimashki dynasty was also marked by diplomatic alliances, including a marriage between a prince of Anshan and one of the daughters of Shu-Sin, a Sumerian king. Over time, the power of the Sumerians in Mesopotamia began to decline, and it was under the leadership of King Kindatu of the Shimashki dynasty that the Elamites achieved a great victory. In 2004 BC, the Elamites, allied with the inhabitants of Susa, invaded and sacked Ur, taking the Sumerian king Ibisin captive and putting an end to the third dynasty of Ur. However, the Elamite victory was short-lived, as the Akkadians managed to retake Ur and expel the Elamites. The Sukalma dynasty, which ruled Elam from around 2100 to 1700 BC, was also a period of great historical importance. This dynasty, which originated with King Eberet, was contemporary with major Mesopotamian empires such as the Old Assyrian Empire and the Old Babylonian Empire. During the reign of the Sukalma dynasty, Elam had a strong presence in Mesopotamian political affairs. The Elamites became powerful enough to interfere in the region's political dynamics. King Siwe-Pala-Hupak, one of the most notable rulers of this dynasty, was respected by Mesopotamian kings such as Zimrilim of Mari and even Hammurabi of Babylon. He was called father by these kings, which shows the influence and respect the Elamites earned during that time. The Elamite dynasty also engaged in diplomatic alliances and cultural exchanges with various Mesopotamian city-states, even sending envoys to the Kingdom of Emar and the city of Qatna in Syria. However, Elam's power over Mesopotamia was challenged when Hammurabi, the famous Babylonian king, managed to drive the Elamites out of their conquests in the region. In 1763 BC, Hammurabi overthrew King Rimsin of Larsa, who had Elamite roots, and established the Babylonian Empire, ending the brief era of Elamite supremacy in southern Mesopotamia. After the defeat of the Elamites, Elam entered a period of instability. The Sukalma dynasty gradually lost power, especially with the rise of Kassite control over Babylon from around 1500 BC. During this period, historical sources become scarce, and Elam increasingly became a civilization isolated from the major historical events of Mesopotamia. During the Middle Elamite period, which spanned approximately from 1500 to 1100 BC, Elam went through a time of great transformation and expansion. The rise of the Anchenite dynasties marked the beginning of a new phase for the region, with the strengthening of Susa as the de facto capital of the empire and a deepening of Elamite cultural identity, particularly through the Elamization of Susa. The first of the Anchenite dynasties, the Kidanuid dynasty, began its rise around 1500 BC. During this period, Elam began to reorganize politically and culturally, consolidating its strength under the title King of Anshan and Susa. The city of Susa, with its strategic location and historical importance, emerged as the center of power, not only as a political hub, but also as a cultural and religious nucleus of Elam. The Elamite rulers, especially those from the Anchenite dynasties, continued to expand Elam's influence beyond its traditional borders. One of the key features of this period was Elam's constant interaction with other regional powers, particularly the Kassites of Babylon. The Egahalkid dynasty, which ruled roughly between 1400 and 1200 BC, engaged in political marriages with Kassite royal families. The Kassites, who had taken power in Babylon after the sack of the Hittite Empire, were also interested in Elam, seeking to extend their influence in the region. During the reign of Kassite King Kurigalzu II, around 1300 BC, Babylon temporarily occupied Elam. However, the Elamites resisted the Kassite invasion, and Kassite power began to decline with the rise of the Assyrian Empire. Around 1200 BC, the Elamite king Kidin Kutran achieved a major victory over the Kassites, defeating King Enlil-nadin Shumi and later Adad-Shuma Idinar, driving them out of Elam and restoring the region's independence. The height of Elamite power during the Middle Elamite period occurred under the Shutrukid dynasty, which ruled approximately from 1200 to 1100 BC. The Shutrukids, with their rulers Shutruk-Nakhkunte and his sons Kutir-Nakhkunte II, Shilak-in-Shushinak, and Hutelutush-in-Shushinak, were responsible for expanding the Elamite Empire through several successful military campaigns against Babylon, which was still under Kassite control at the time. One of the most notable events of this period was the sack of Babylon carried out by Shutruk-Nakhkunte, who brought back war trophies to Susa, including statues of Marduk, the famous obelisk of Manishtushu, the stele of Hammurabi, and the stele of Naram Sin, symbols of the power and grandeur of Mesopotamian civilizations. These artifacts were not just spoils of conquest, they also represented the cultural and political dominance that Elam exercised over Babylon during this time. After defeating the Kassites and taking control of much of Babylon, The Elamites had brief conflicts with the Assyrian Empire, which was becoming a growing power in the region. However, Elam managed to conquer the Assyrian city of Arapha before being defeated by the Assyrian king Ashurdan I, who imposed a treaty on Elam, forcing it to surrender part of its conquests. After the decline of the Shutrukid dynasty, Elam entered a phase of fragmentation and weakening, known as the Neo-Elamite period. This period, which can be divided into 3 phases, was marked by internal struggles and increasing pressure from external powers like the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which was expanding into Mesopotamia and neighboring regions. The first Neo-Elamite phase is quite obscure and poorly documented. Anshan, one of Elam's most important centers, remained under Elamite control, but the records are scarce. During this time, it appears that a series of failed alliances occurred between Elam, Babylonians, Chaldeans, and other peoples, all trying to resist the growing power of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which dominated much of Mesopotamia. During the reign of the Babylonian king Marduk-apla-ushur of Elamite origin, there are records of Elamites joining King Marduk-balassu-ikbi of Babylon against the Assyrian army commanded by Shamshi-Adad V, but without success. Elam's influence on Mesopotamian politics was already in decline, while the Neo-Assyrian Empire continued its expansion. Starting around 770 BC, the second Neo-Elamite period was marked by intense military campaigns and direct confrontations with the Neo-Assyrian Empire. One of the most notable events of this period was the Battle of Ulai in 653 BC, where the Elamite army, under King Tepti Humban in Shushinak, fought against the Assyrian forces led by Ashurbanipal. The conflict ended in a decisive Elamite defeat, and Susa, the Elamite capital, was sacked by the Assyrians. The Elamite king, Tepti Humban in Shushinak, was killed, and the city of Susa was occupied by Ashurbanipal. The second Neo-Elamite period was also marked by increasing migration of Indo-European-speaking Iranian peoples to the Iranian plateau, such as the Medes, Persians, and Parthians. These new peoples gradually began to occupy the lands where Elam had once thrived. Among these tribes, the Persians were the most notable. Though initially vassals of the Assyrian Empire, the Persians eventually became a dominant force in the region, ultimately establishing the Achaemenid Empire, which would replace Elam. During this period, Elam tried to resist Assyrian rule by forming alliances with Marduk-apla-iddina, Merodach-Baladan, the Chaldean leader, in an attempt to preserve both Babylonian and Elamite independence. However, Sargon II's campaigns against the Elamites were successful, and the region was gradually subdued. Relations with Babylon deteriorated, and Assyrian control was consolidated in Mesopotamia, with Sennacherib defeating both the Elamite and Babylonian forces. The third Neo-Elamite period, in turn, was marked by an even deeper decline for Elam. The last king of the Shutrukid dynasty, Shutruk-Nakkhunta II, was murdered by his own brother, Halutash in Shushinak I, amid a backdrop of dynastic intrigue. After the death of Shutruk-Nakkhunta II, Elam entered a period of instability, with internal conflicts and power struggles among rival factions. Relations with Assyria, initially tense, became fatal for Elam. In 646 BC, Ashurbanipal once again invaded Susa, sacking the city, destroying its temples and ziggurats, and imposing total humiliation upon Elam. Ashurbanipal boasted that he had destroyed Susa and exposed the bones of its ancient kings to the sun. His destruction was so complete that many believe it marked the effective end of the Elamite Empire. The fragmentation of the Elamite kingdom was also intensified by the rise of small kingdoms whose rulers called themselves kings of Anshan and Susa. Even so, Elam was already in irreversible decline, and Elamite power gradually dissolved under Assyrian domination in the region. With Ashurbanipal's death in 631 BC, the Assyrian Empire began to face internal civil wars and lose its cohesion. This opened a window of opportunity for Iranian peoples, such as the Medes, Parthians, and Persians, to free themselves from Assyrian rule. It was during this time that the Medes took control of Elam, and Cyaxares, king of the Medes, formed an alliance with Nabopolassar of Babylon and other tribes to overthrow Assyria, eventually leading to the rise of the Median and Achaemenid empires. The Persians soon replaced the Elamites as the leading power in the region, establishing the Achaemenid Empire, which would rule over much of Elam's former territory. The last king of Elam, Ashina, was deposed and executed by Darius I the Great in 522 BC, marking the end of Elam's long history as an independent kingdom. With Elam's fall and the rise of the Achaemenid Empire, the region ceased to be a center of power and was instead absorbed into the new Persian Empire. The city of Susa continued to exist, but under Persian rule, and Elam's legacy was absorbed into Persian culture. Thus, the Elamite civilization, after more than 2,000 years of history, was finally obliterated, its autonomy lost forever in the pages of history.